He wasn't just pulled over, he was targeted. She didn't see a judge, she saw a suspect. On a quiet street in Silver Ridge, a federal judge named Jonathan Miles was driving home. Tired, peaceful, listening to Miles Davis after a long day in court. But in less than 5 minutes, his entire world flipped upside down. Red and blue lights, a voice barking orders. And suddenly a man who'd spent 40 years defending justice was being stripped of his own. Tonight we tell the true story of how one routine traffic stop became a national headline, how one man stood tall against humiliation, and how a community rose up to say, enough is enough. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. Comment below, and if you believe in justice, hit that like button, because this story needs to be heard. Judge Jonathan Miles had driven this route home for years. Silver Ridge wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a symbol of everything he had built. Tree-lined streets, porch lights glowing, kids still out riding bikes under the fading dusk. It was peaceful, familiar, safe. But that night, something shifted. As Jonathan turned onto Maplewood Drive, a flash of lights in his rearview mirror broke the calm. He squinted, red and blue unmistakable. A patrol car. He wasn't speeding. Plates were valid, papers in order. Still, the sirens wailed. Jonathan eased his Tesla Model S to the curb beneath a towering oak. He lowered the Jazz, rolled down his window, and placed both hands calmly on the steering wheel. It was muscle memory by now, an unspoken ritual known by every black man in America. From the rearview mirror, he saw her approach. Officer Karen Whitman, mid-40s, white, stern-faced. Her flashlight sliced through the darkness, landing squarely on his face. "License and registration," she snapped, skipping any pleasantries. Jonathan kept his voice calm, measured. "Of course, officer. May I ask what this stop is regarding?" She didn't answer, just repeated her demand, more forceful now. Jonathan moved deliberately, narrating every motion. "I'm reaching for my glove compartment now." He retrieved his documents, including his judge's ID, and handed them over. "Jonathan Miles," he said, "federal judge. I live 3 blocks down on Willow Bend." Her eyes barely flicked over the ID. "Step out of the vehicle," she ordered. Jonathan blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Out." Her hand hovered near her holster now. The calm of Silver Ridge evaporated. Jonathan could feel the shift in the air. Not just tension, but something deeper. A silent suspicion, an unspoken threat. He opened the door slowly, standing tall beside his car. "This is my vehicle. I've owned it for years. You can verify the plates." "Face the vehicle." Jonathan turned, hands resting gently on the roof. That's when another car arrived. A second patrol unit. A younger officer stepped out. Officer Daniel Brooks, early 30s, uncertain in his body language. His eyes darted between Whitman and Jonathan, then to the ID still in her hand. Whitman barked the next order. "Search the vehicle. Start with the trunk." Jonathan tensed. "You have no cause," he said, his voice firm now. "You haven't even run the plates." Whitman didn't answer. Brooks hesitated, then moved toward the trunk. His hands hovered, unsure. Jonathan didn't move. His heart was pounding, but his posture was steel. The latch clicked. The trunk opened. Jonathan already knew what was in there. Emergency kit, umbrella, a gym bag. That's it. But then, Brooks froze. He reached in slowly, pulled out a black duffel bag. Heavy, full. Jonathan stared. "That's not mine," he said quietly. Whitman smirked. "Isn't it funny how they always say that?" Inside the bag, stacks of cash, a few small plastic packets. Jonathan's stomach dropped. He hadn't seen that bag in his life. And in that moment, he knew. This wasn't a traffic stop. This was an ambush. The silence that followed was unbearable. Officer Brooks held the duffel bag like it was radioactive. His brow furrowed, flashlight shaking slightly in his grip as he peered inside again. Bundles of $100 bills, Ziploc bags filled with white powder. From across the back of the Tesla, Jonathan's voice broke the tension. Steady, controlled, dangerous in its quiet clarity. "That is not my bag." Brooks looked up, startled. "It was in your trunk, sir." Jonathan didn't blink. I understand what it looks like, but I'm telling you, it wasn't there when I left the courthouse 20 minutes ago. Officer Whitman stepped forward. The way she moved, it wasn't investigation, it was performance. Her boots echoed on the asphalt like a verdict already handed down. Well, isn't that convenient, she sneered. A federal judge, a black man, a car full of cash and coke. She tilted her head, eyes gleaming with accusation. Almost sounds like a headline, doesn't it? Jonathan turned slightly toward her, hands still resting on the car. You think this is some game? Some statement? His voice was ice over fire. You're planting evidence on a federal judge. And you don't even care. Whitman didn't flinch. You should be more worried about what the news will care about. Brooks was silent now, clearly rattled. He looked back into the trunk, then at the ID card still clutched in Whitman's hand. Maybe we should run the plates, he said softly. We found the bag, she snapped. That's all the probable cause we need. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Run the plates, check my ID. You'll see this car is mine, registered to me for over 4 years. What you won't find, he said, voice low and hard, is any connection between me and that bag. But Whitman was already ignoring him. She pulled out her radio and called for backup. Code language, short bursts, intentions masked by protocol. Jonathan's thoughts were racing. He'd seen this play out before. From the bench, from the evidence table, from shaky phone footage brought in by families begging for justice. But this time, it wasn't theory, it wasn't testimony, it was his life, his career, his name. Footsteps echoed behind him, neighbors peeking from porches drawn by the flashing lights. Curtains shifted, doors creaked open, whispers began to ripple like wind through dry leaves. And then a voice called out, sharp, familiar, defiant. Jonathan? What's going on? It was Mrs. Loretta Jenkins from across the street, elderly, sharp as a tack, and loud enough to rattle windows when she needed to. Whitman turned toward her. Ma'am, please stay back. This is a police matter. No, this is a community matter, Loretta shot back. That man has lived here longer than you've worn that badge. More neighbors began to gather. Jonathan turned his head slightly, not to provoke, but to anchor himself. He wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, that changed everything. At first, it was just a voice. Jonathan? What's going on out there? Mrs. Loretta Jenkins, 72 years old, sharp-tongued and respected like a neighborhood matriarch. She stood on her porch in a pale blue nightgown, slippers on, arms crossed with the authority of someone who had watched generations grow up on Maplewood Drive. I said, what's going on? Officer Whitman turned annoyed. Ma'am, please stay on your porch. This is a police matter. But Loretta wasn't moving. That's Judge Miles you're yelling at. And unless he turned into a drug dealer in the past 20 minutes, I suggest you check yourself. Jonathan closed his eyes for half a breath, just long enough to steady his pulse. Loretta was always blunt, but tonight her voice rang like a bell. Porch lights began to flicker on. First across the street, then next door, then 3 houses down. Doors opened. People stepped out. Pajamas, hoodies, flip-flops, faces blinking at the lights, the tension, the cops. A few neighbors moved closer to the sidewalk, uncertain but concerned. Is that Jonathan? Why are they searching his car? What's in the trunk? The street, just minutes ago drenched in twilight silence, now buzzed with whispers and camera phones. The flashing red and blue lights reflected in dozens of watching eyes. Officer Whitman's voice grew louder. Everyone back, now! She moved her hand, gesturing to maintain distance. But the authority in her tone was cracking. A younger man, Derek, early 20s college student, stepped forward, phone in hand, streaming live. Facebook is watching, just letting y'all know. And Twitter too. You should smile, officer. You're about to go viral. Whitman's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. Jonathan stood motionless, still by his car, still with his hands relaxed on the roof. His breathing was slow, but his heart was thudding like a war drum in his chest. He could feel the weight of the moment expanding, like a balloon ready to pop. Then he spoke. His voice was calm, but it carried across the street like a courtroom gavel. She didn't check my license, didn't run my plates, didn't ask any real questions, just pulled me out of the car and found a bag that doesn't belong to me." More phones came out. Red dots recording, eyes narrowed. "You mean she didn't even verify your ID?" someone called out. "No," Jonathan replied, "because it wasn't about the truth. It was about what she wanted to believe." The tension in the air grew thick, almost physical, like static before a lightning strike. Officer Brooks stood nearby, still holding the duffel bag like it might explode. Sweat had formed on his brow. His fingers were tense, his shoulders slumped. You could see it. He was unraveling. "Officer Brooks," Jonathan said, turning just enough to make eye contact. "You still have time to do the right thing." Brooks looked from Jonathan to Whitman. Maybe we should check the registration," he said softly, uncertainly. Whitman's response came like a whip. "We have probable cause." "But," Brooks hesitated, "he's a federal judge." "We found drugs and cash," Whitman shot back. "That's all that matters." "No," a voice called out. Loretta again, louder now. "What matters is you're trying to railroad a black man in his own neighborhood, and we're not going to stay silent about it." A wave of murmurs and affirmations rippled through the crowd. More neighbors had gathered now. A few were live streaming. Some whispered. Others stood with arms crossed, unmoving. This wasn't a crowd anymore. It was a witness stand. From further down the street, a new sound emerged. Tires rolling slow, controlled. A cruiser turned the corner and approached the scene with deliberate ease. Captain Gregory Walters, tall, gray-haired, a man whose uniform looked like it belonged more in an office than on the street. But he carried the weight of command in his stride. His cruiser rolled to a stop. He stepped out slowly, scanning the growing crowd. The two officers, the trunk still open, the bag sitting ominously on the hood of the Tesla. Then he saw Jonathan. His eyes widened, not out of fear but recognition. "Judge Miles?" Jonathan didn't flinch. "Captain, what the hell is going on here?" Whitman stepped forward. "Vehicle matched a stolen car report. During the search, we found this," she said, gesturing toward the duffel bag. "Did you verify his identity?" Walters asked flatly. "We haven't had time," Jonathan cut in. "She's had 20 minutes. I gave her my ID. She didn't check it." Walters turned toward Brooks. "Did you run the plates?" Brooks looked like he wanted to disappear. "Not yet, sir." Walters exhaled slowly, then reached for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Captain Walters. I need a registration check on a Tesla Model S. Plate 6XGZ142. The crowd held its breath. Somewhere, a dog barked. Someone coughed. Jonathan stood still, eyes locked on Whitman. She wouldn't look at him. Then the radio crackled. "Copy that, Captain. Vehicle registered to a Jonathan Miles. No alerts, no theft report. Address, 819 Willow Bend Drive." The silence that followed hit like thunder. Neighbors exhaled audibly. Derek lowered his phone for a second, just to mutter, "Damn." Loretta folded her arms tighter. "Well," she said, eyes like fire. "What now, officer?" Whitman said nothing. Walters turned slowly to her. "You never checked?" "I had reason to believe." "No," Walters snapped. "You had bias. You acted on instinct, not procedure." Jonathan stepped forward slowly, still calm, but this time with fire in his voice. "You dragged me out of my car, in my own neighborhood, in front of my neighbors. You searched without cause. And now there's a bag in my trunk that doesn't belong to me." He gestured toward the crowd. "And now all these people are here, watching, recording, because they know what this is." Whitman's mouth opened, but no words came out. "You need to step away," Walters said to her. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through everything. Whitman hesitated. Then finally she backed off. Walters turned to Brooks. "Secure the scene. Nobody moves until I get internal affairs on the line." Brooks nodded quickly, relieved. Jonathan didn't move. He was still standing tall, still processing the humiliation. But something had shifted. He wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was standing for something bigger, something that had just begun. Captain Walters didn't say much at first. He stood with his arms crossed, eyes darting between the bag, the trunk, and the man he knew not just as a neighbor, but as a pillar of law. Judge Jonathan Miles had presided over some of the most high-profile civil rights cases in the state, a name that carried weight, respect, and yet tonight, That name had been dragged into the street like a suspect. The crowd was quiet now, but not silent. They watched, phones still recording, a collective energy humming beneath the surface. Every breath, every glance, every word from here on out, it all mattered. Walters turned to Officer Whitman. "Give me your report, all of it, from the beginning." Her posture stiffened. "Vehicle matched a report of a stolen Tesla, black, same model. We initiated a stop. During the search, we found the bag." Walters raised an eyebrow. "Who authorized the search?" Whitman hesitated. "He didn't consent," she admitted, "but under probable cause." "There was no probable cause," Jonathan cut in, his voice calm but charged. "You didn't verify my license, didn't run the plates. You went straight to escalation. You know what that is, Captain?" Walters nodded slowly. "Racial profiling." The words landed like a slap across the crowd. A woman in the back gasped. Someone muttered, "Say it again." Jonathan continued. "She saw a black man in a nice car, in a quiet neighborhood, and she didn't think judge. She thought criminal. That's the problem." Whitman's jaw clenched. "I did my job." "No," Jonathan said. "You did something, but it wasn't your job." He turned to Walters now, stepping forward. "You said you'd call internal affairs. I want it done. Right here, right now, not later, not buried under paperwork. I want transparency." Walters didn't argue. He reached for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Captain Walters. I need internal affairs on scene at Maplewood and Willow Bend. Immediate response. Possible misconduct involving an officer." The crowd shifted, an audible release of breath, like someone had finally opened a window in a smoke-filled room. Then a familiar voice rang out again. "Now that's more like it," said Loretta Jenkins from her porch. "About damn time someone around here stood up for what's right." Laughter, nervous but real, spread among the neighbors. But Jonathan wasn't smiling. He turned toward the bag still sitting on the hood of his car. "So now the question becomes, where did that bag come from?" All eyes turned to the black duffel. It hadn't moved, hadn't changed, but now it felt radioactive, a bomb waiting to detonate. Walters asked, "Is there any body cam footage?" Whitman hesitated. "Camera was on, but what?" "I haven't reviewed it yet," she replied. Walters looked to Brooks. "You?" Brooks nodded. "Mine was on too. I can submit it." Jonathan stepped in. "Then let's pull the footage now, tonight. Don't let this wait until morning, because that bag was not in my trunk when I left the courthouse." Whitman broke her silence, voice sharper now. "You think I planted it?" Jonathan turned toward her fully, calm but cutting. "I think you didn't want to find the truth. And in this job, that's almost worse." Her face faltered. And just then, a man stepped from the far side of the crowd. Clean cut, late 30s, holding a DSLR camera and wearing a press badge around his neck. "I'm from the local station," he said. "We were tipped off when the live stream started. We've been rolling for 10 minutes. Walters blinked, then exhaled. "Of course you have." Jonathan didn't seem surprised. "Good, let them watch." The reporter moved closer, keeping a respectful distance. "Judge Miles, would you be willing to speak on record?" Jonathan paused, looked out over the crowd. Then he nodded. "I want people to see what happens when power is abused. I want them to know this happens to people who don't wear robes, to those who don't have an audience. If it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone." He turned, letting his voice project. "This system doesn't just need correction, it needs accountability." The reporter nodded. "Powerful words, Judge. What do you want to see happen next?" Jonathan didn't blink. "I want Officer Whitman suspended. I want an investigation not just into this stop, but into every stop she's conducted. And I want this community involved in the reform process. No more closed doors." Whitman's face flushed. "This is political." "No," he said, shaking his head. "This is personal." Loretta clapped once, loud. A few others joined. Applause spread, not raucous but firm. Earned. A black SUV pulled up, unmarked. Two men stepped out, suits on, badges visible. Internal affairs. Walters met them halfway, briefing quickly. Within minutes, they were examining body cams, asking questions, separating officers for individual statements. Meanwhile, the neighbors stayed. They didn't leave. They waited. Because they knew the outcome didn't just belong to Jonathan. It belonged to all of them. Children of single mothers who'd been pulled over for broken taillights. Fathers who'd had to tell their sons how to keep their hands visible during a stop. College students who knew they couldn't afford to mouth off. Women who walked faster when they saw flashing lights, not because they were guilty, but because they were afraid. Tonight wasn't just about justice for Jonathan Miles. It was about justice for all the nights that had come before, and all the nights that might come again. Walters returned to the group. "We've reviewed part of the footage," he said, "and while the investigation is ongoing, I can confirm this. There was no visible bag when Officer Brooks opened the trunk." A hush fell. Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "Say that again." "The camera shows Brooks opening an empty trunk, then a cut. Then suddenly, the bag's there." Gasps, murmurs. Whitman looked like stone, pale stone. Jonathan inhaled, slow and deep. "You tried to destroy everything I built," he said to her, not loudly, not angrily, but with a weight that made the entire block lean in. "But you forgot one thing." "What's that?" she whispered, barely audible. "I'm not alone." He turned, looked over the crowd. Faces watching, phones raised, hands clapping now. Louder, stronger. "You did this in the dark," he said, "but the light always finds you." For a long moment, no one said anything. The words from Captain Walters echoed down Maplewood Drive like a courtroom sentence. There was no bag in the trunk when it was first opened. It was subtle, but damning, enough to crack the ground beneath Officer Karen Whitman's feet. She didn't speak. Her arms remained tightly crossed, her face expressionless. But the tremor in her jaw betrayed her. She knew what came next. Officer Daniel Brooks, standing just a few steps behind her, didn't move either. But his posture had changed. Less tense, less afraid. The burden he'd been carrying since the moment he popped that trunk had begun to lift. He'd seen the footage. He knew the truth. And now, so did everyone else. A wave of voices rippled through the crowd. So they planted it. She lied. She could have ruined his life. Jonathan stood beside his Tesla, back straight, arms by his side. The flashing lights still bounced off the black paint of his car, the red and blue glow mixing with the golden hue of the porch lamps. But something had shifted. This wasn't chaos anymore. This was clarity. Walters cleared his throat, stepping forward. "Judge Miles," he said more carefully now, "IA is opening a full investigation. Officer Whitman will be placed on immediate suspension pending review." He glanced toward her, then corrected himself. "No, effective immediately. Officer Whitman, turn in your badge." That line, clear, sharp, hung in the air. The crowd gasped. Phones zoomed in. Whitman blinked. "You're serious?" Walters didn't flinch. "We just watched the footage. You said the bag was in the trunk when you opened it. But it wasn't. Then it was. You lied, and you escalated a situation without cause." Her face began to flush with color. Rage, maybe, or shame. It was hard to tell. "You're going to throw me under the bus for this?" "I'm not throwing you anywhere," Walters said quietly. "You walked into this yourself." Whitman opened her mouth to argue, but stopped. Her words faltered. She looked around. The crowd, the phones, the judgment. There was no cover left. Finally, she unpinned her badge with shaking fingers and handed it over. Walters took it. No ceremony, just silence. Then he turned to Officer Brooks. "You're a part of this too, son. What you do next matters." Brooks met his captain's eyes, then Jonathan's. "I'll testify," he said, steady for the first time all night. "I should have stopped it, but I won't stay silent now." Jonathan gave him the smallest nod of approval. Just enough. Then he turned to the crowd. "You all saw what happened here tonight," he said, raising his voice. "And if you think this ends with me, you're wrong. There are people in this neighborhood, this city, who've been through worse and didn't have a community to stand behind them." He paused. "Well, tonight we changed that." Applause broke out, not wild but sincere. It grew quickly, spreading down the street. A few people clapped with tears in their eyes. Others just nodded silently. They weren't just neighbors anymore. They were witnesses, supporters, defenders. Loretta Jenkins stepped forward, moving to Jonathan's side. "I've lived here 50 years, she said, eyes fierce. "I've seen police scare people into silence. But not tonight. This time, the badge didn't win." Jonathan looked at her, then back to the crowd. "But don't clap for me. Don't make me the hero of this story. I had a name, a position, a platform. Most people don't." He pointed toward the now empty patrol car. "That badge? That uniform? It can protect or destroy, but it only works if we're watching, if we're speaking up, if we never let it go unchecked." Walters stepped forward again, taking a deep breath. "We'll be issuing a formal apology, not just to you, Judge Miles, but to this community." Jonathan stared at him. "No," he said, voice quiet but firm. "You'll issue a plan, not just words. I want to see training, oversight, monthly review boards with civilians in the room. This department doesn't just need reform, it needs reckoning." Walters nodded slowly, defeated but understanding. "Then let's start tonight." The crowd let out another cheer. Somewhere behind them, the duffel bag was finally being zipped up and taken into evidence. Not as proof of Jonathan's guilt, but as evidence of something far darker. Abuse of power, concealed beneath a badge and a flashlight. As the IA agents finished their preliminary report, neighbors began to drift back toward their homes. Some stayed behind to hug Jonathan. Others just touched his arm or nodded silently. It was a victory, but a heavy one. When the street finally began to quiet, Jonathan stood alone beside his car once more. The jazz that had once played inside it was long gone, but the man was still here, and so was the truth. By the time the last cruiser pulled away, it was well past midnight, but no one in Silver Ridge slept easy that night. The live streams had already spread. Hashtags began trending within hours. Number Justice for Judge Miles, number Maplewood Incident, number Do Your Job Right. News vans arrived before sunrise. Local reporters set up outside the community center, before coffee even brewed. Judge Jonathan Miles didn't give a press conference that morning. Instead, he walked into the Brookdale Heights Community Hall at 8 a.m. sharp and took a seat, not at a podium, but in the front row. Because this wasn't going to be a speech, it was going to be a conversation. By 8:15, the room was full, standing room only. Neighbors, pastors, teachers, even off-duty officers who'd watched the videos and came looking for answers. At 8:30, Officer Daniel Brooks entered, without a uniform. And behind him, to everyone's surprise, was Karen Whitman. She wasn't in blue either. She looked smaller out of the badge, not weaker, but human. She stood near the side, head lowered. No one clapped, no one booed, just silence. And that was louder than anything else. At 9 o'clock, Jonathan finally stood up. "I wasn't going to speak this morning," he said, his voice steady, "but something happened last night that changed everything." He looked around the room, faces locked in attention, hearts still beating with the adrenaline of what they had witnessed. A system showed its cracks, a community found its voice, and a man, me, almost lost everything because someone in uniform made a decision based not on fact, but on fear. He paused, let the words sink in. "But here's what matters now. We don't let this become just another story. We don't let it fade after the hashtag stopped trending." Jonathan pointed to the crowd. "You all showed up. You recorded. You raised your voices. And because of that, I'm still standing here. Not in a cell. Not in court defending my name. But here. Home." He turned slightly, eyes now locked on Officer Whitman. "And I see you. You made a choice. One I'll never forget. But I'll also never hate you." Gasps rippled. Whitman looked up, confused. "You know why?" Jonathan continued. "Because I don't want justice built on revenge. I want it built on truth, and that starts with accountability and empathy." Whitman stepped forward. Her voice shook. "I failed you. I profiled you. And I almost destroyed your life." She swallowed hard. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I'm here to say I'm going to change. Not with words, with action. I've stepped down. I'm joining the reform board you demanded, and I want to help rebuild what I helped break." No applause, no cheers, just stillness and sincerity. Jonathan gave a slow nod, then turned back to the community. "This isn't about me," he said. "It never was. It's about every young man who doesn't have a title to protect him, every woman who drives home late and prays the flashing lights don't stop behind her, every kid taught to keep their hands up, not because it's right, but because it's safe." His voice grew stronger now. Justice doesn't begin in the courtroom. It begins on the street, at the stop sign, at the sidewalk, with the decisions people in power make when no one's looking. He let those words settle like dust after a storm. Then he looked into the cameras, now streaming live again. Not because he asked them to, but because someone had to carry this message beyond four walls. If this story moved you, don't just click away. Leave a comment. Tell us where you're from. Tell us how this story reflects your community or someone you know. Because the only way to stop this from happening again is to never let it be forgotten. And with that, he stepped down. Not as a victim, not even just a survivor, but as a voice, one that wouldn't be silenced again. We often think justice lives inside courtrooms, tucked away behind gavels and law books. But sometimes justice starts on the side of a quiet road, under flashing lights, with a man refusing to bow to false power and a community refusing to look away. Judge Jonathan Miles didn't fight back with fists. He fought with dignity, with presence, with truth. And that's the lesson here. Power doesn't come from the badge. It comes from what we choose to do when no one's watching or when everyone is. Your turn. Now we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Have you ever witnessed or experienced something like this? What would you have done in that situation? What does justice look like in your neighborhood? Your voice matters more than you think. Together, we can make sure stories like this don't end in silence, but in change.